They called me a hero, gave me a white uniform, a red cross on my arm, and sent me off to save lives. But forgot to mention I'd have to hide my own. Because while my hands were patching up wounded soldiers, my body was seen as a mistake that needed to be erased. With a smile. I was a nurse during the war. But what broke me wasn't the bullets or the screams of pain. It was the silence. A polite silence, signed by spotless officers who stripped me of everything, and still smiled, like they were handing me a bouquet. The cruelest part of war isn't what explodes outside. It's what slowly rips you apart inside, without leaving a visible scar. If you think you've heard every war story, this one will shake you, because it's not about victories, medals, or anthems. It's about what no one saw, about what was buried without a coffin. And if you stay with me until the end, you'll understand what still lives on, even when it seems like everything's been taken away. My name is Ethel Josephine Green. I'm 87 years old. I was a nurse during the war, but not just any nurse. I was black, segregated, pushed into the stuffy corners of field hospitals in southern Alabama, where flies danced over open wounds and silence screamed louder than any bomb. Now I live here, in this old house in Louisiana, where time moves slow on us and the crickets sound like they're praying with me at night. I wear a floral blouse, a wooden cross on my chest, and worn-out flip-flops on my feet. But inside, I still carry a secret, one of those that doesn't fit inside a confessional, because it was torn from me with such cruelty that even the sky turned its face away. And if you've got a little time, come, sit with me. Picture us on my screened-in porch, the breeze sneaking in from the side, rocking my chair gently. Grab a warm cup, take a deep breath, and listen with your heart, because the war story I'm about to tell is the kind they never put in books. A heartbreaking story of pain, silence, and a secret that followed me my whole life. If this story touches something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it too. Subscribe to the channel, and stay till the end, because what they took from me might still be returned, in part, through the ears of someone like you. I didn't really know what to expect when they said we'd be stationed in Alabama, but I sure remember what I found. Mud. So much mud. Mud in my boots, mud on the hem of my dress, mud inside my thoughts, the smell of wet earth mixed with the iron of blood, and the sour stench of old bandages made me sick on the first day. And still, I took a deep breath and stepped in. The first thing they told me was, colored nurses stay in Ward 2. Ward 2 was smaller, hotter, fewer instruments, fewer clean towels, fewer whole mattresses, but more bodies, black bodies. A few white soldiers ended up there too, but only when Ward 1 was full. And even then, it wasn't common. And when they came, they didn't look us in the eye. Their pain didn't seem to match our presence. I was 20, young, with small hands and a big heart. My uniform was white, but it didn't stay that way for long. It got stained with rust, with urine, with other people's sweat. I'm not complaining. Caring was what I knew. Since I was a kid, I helped my mama treat snake bites, malaria fevers, and porch-side births. But in that place, they expected us to be tough, not tender. The tent I worked in had holes in the canvas roof. When it rained, water dripped right onto the wounded. I'd stretch out cloths, rig up bowls, do what I could. I remember one night I pulled a bucket of water from a boy's lungs. I don't even know how else to say that. The poor kid had been hit with shrapnel, and storm water mixed with what he was coughing up. Blood, water, bits of flesh, all of it. And I just sat there, holding his hand as his eyes slipped away. I never understood why they said nurses like us couldn't walk through the main ward. They said it was regimental organization, but it wasn't. It was like white pain was more delicate. Like their suffering deserved more sheets, more silence, more care. Meanwhile, we were jabbing with bent needles, wrapping wounds with ripped-up linens, praying not to run out of morphine. The war stories I heard as a girl were full of flags, medals, noble men, and hymns playing in the background. But in that field where pain had a color, the only anthem was the muffled scream of those who couldn't cry out. And the flag? It was a dirty sheet draped over the ones who wouldn't make it back. There was a woman named Bernice. She was older than me, in her 30s, with a deep voice and sharp eyes. She was our unofficial leader. When a doctor refused to speak directly to us, Bernice translated. She taught me how to take blood pressure by ear, how to spot infection from the color of sweat, and most of all, how to swallow the right words so we wouldn't get dismissed. She used to say, "Speak soft, but never bow your head." And there was the forbidden words, box. Yeah, you heard right. A wooden box where we'd drop little notes with the things we couldn't say out loud. It started as a joke, but turned into something like a ritual. Every week, each nurse from Ward 2 would write something on a slip and slide it in. Things like, "I cried today washing a boy who looked like my brother," or, "I'm scared I'll fall asleep and wake up in the grave next door." Sometimes just one word, lonely. One day the box disappeared. We never found out who took it. I always believed someone from admin got their hands on it. Maybe they read every note. Maybe they laughed. Maybe they burned it. That was the kind of silence we lived in. Silence with a padlock. But not everything was heavy. Sometimes little things saved us. A girl named Cora sang softly as she cleaned wounds. A blind soldier who made origami from bandage wrappers just by touch. One night someone left sweetbread on our table with a note that said, "For the hands that hold pain like angels." We never found out who it was. But that moment we all cried quietly like it was Christmas, even without a tree, without snow, without home. I think it was there, in that hot and filthy patch of land, that I first understood war doesn't just kill with bullets. It kills in pieces. It chips away at you. A sliver of faith, a shard of hope, a piece of your body. And before you know it, you're alive, but missing on the inside. I know this isn't the kind of war story you find in books, but it was mine. And with time, I realized the darker the skin, the more invisible the sacrifice. But even with all of that, I still had no idea how much more I would lose. Because there's a kind of pain that has no name. A kind of loss you don't bury in a graveyard, but carry in your womb. And it was only when I met Charles that I learned even pain can come wearing a smile. I remember the color of the light that day like it just happened. It was this yellowish, hazy light, like the sun had filtered through a dirty sheet before reaching us. It was hot. Not the sleepy kind of heat, but the kind that makes you sick, the kind that makes sweat cling to the back of your neck like it's part of your skin. And in that heat, they brought Charles. He came in on a makeshift stretcher, his uniform caked in dry dirt, blood on both knees. But what scared me most wasn't the wounds. It was his eyes. His eyes were calm, like he'd already made peace with whatever was coming. Like he was saying, "Don't rush me. I've seen enough." I was assigned to his triage. I took his chart with hands still dirty from another patient and started noting his vitals. "Lieutenant Charles E. Collins," the badge read. But he stopped me, his voice raspy. "Just call me Charles. The rest is just wait." It was the first time a white man asked me to call him by his first name. I froze, looked around to see if anyone heard. Nobody seemed to notice. Ward 2 was loud. Moans, soaked cloths, thick heat. And there, in the middle of all that urgency, he talked to me like we were sitting on a porch, sipping tea. I cleaned his knees gently, trying not to show what I felt. Just another wounded man, I told myself. Another broken body that needed mending. But as I wiped the gauze across his skin, I noticed he never looked away. Not with pity, not with surprise. He looked like someone who actually saw me. Don't ask me why, but something inside me loosened. A knot, maybe. One of those you don't know you're carrying until it starts to come undone. Over the next few days, Charles stayed in Ward 2. There were other places he could have been transferred to, but he wasn't. They said it was because his leg still needed monitoring. But I knew better. He stayed because he chose to. He chatted with everyone, joked with the other nurses, asked people's names. But with me, he listened. There were nights when I had the graveyard shift and would stop by his tent just to change the dressings. And he'd always be awake, even when he didn't need to be. Sometimes he told stories from his childhood, about a farmhouse in Missouri, a mother who baked apple pies that smelled like cloves, a brother who never came back from the First War. Other times he'd just sit in silence. And somehow, I learned more in that silence than in any of the stories. One night after I'd finished applying ointment to his leg, he gently grabbed my wrist and asked, "You take care of everyone here. But who takes care of you?" I took a while to answer. No one had ever asked me that. Not my mother, not Bernice, not even the chaplain. No one. "I guess no one," I said. He let go of my hand. But later I found a handkerchief in my pocket. A soft cloth one, with the initials CEC stitched in the corner. White with blue stripes. I kept it like you keep a secret that doesn't exist yet. I began to fear that handkerchief more than any open wound, because it symbolized something that wasn't allowed to happen. We weren't allowed to happen. Not in that field. Not in that war. Not under laws louder than any heartbeat. But the heart doesn't follow orders. And on a September night, that disobedience took shape. It was raining. Hard. The canvas roof was dripping into metal pans. We were packed. A convoy had been hit, and nearly 20 soldiers came in all at once. Screams, broken bones, vomit, blood everywhere. The kind of night where your body works on reflex, and your soul goes into hiding. In the middle of the chaos, I was called to help with an amputation. While I held the boy's arm that was about to be cut, I heard a scream. Not his, not from anyone I recognized. It was a deep, raw, almost animal scream. I looked outside. It was Charles. He was outside the tent clutching his chest, kneeling in the mud, struggling to breathe. I ran to him. The others said a nearby explosion startled him, and he fell wrong. But once we got him inside, I realized it wasn't just fear. It was something else. Something inside him. Breaking. I stayed by his side all night, and when everyone else was asleep, I cried on his shoulder. For the first time since I arrived at that field, I let myself cry like someone willing to be seen. And he let me. Didn't hush me, didn't wipe my tears. Just held me and said, "No one's taking this from us." But fate has quick hands and sharp ears. After that day, the look started to change. No one said anything out loud, but they spoke with their eyes, with delays in supplies, with whispers behind my back, and with isolation. Bernice pulled me aside and said, "Be careful. They smile before they bite." I smiled back, but inside I already tasted the fear. That's when the nausea began. At first, mild, then relentless. It didn't take long to figure it out. But what I didn't know was that this would be the start of the most personal war of my life. A war I'd fight against time, against my body, against the walls of that tent, and against a system designed to erase any emotional story that strayed from their script. Because the first scream that tore from my chest wasn't a baby's. It was mine, and it still echoes inside me. War has a strange way of messing with time. The days drag on, but everything changes in a blink. One night you're just a nurse. The next you're curled up at the edge of a cot, trying to fight off a nausea that doesn't come from your stomach. It comes from somewhere deeper. That's how it was for me. No warning. Just a dull sickness, a fleeting dizziness, and the sudden bone-deep knowing that something inside me had changed. Charles left before I could tell him. They said his unit needed him back. He left another note, tucked beneath the clean gauze of his last bandage. Just 3 words. You carry light. Like he was saying, take care of me, even without me. No signature, just a tiny drawing of a sun. I folded that note and hid it inside the wooden cross I still wear around my neck. And after that, my world narrowed. I started walking slower, pulling away from the others. Not by choice, but out of protection. My body had become a secret, a living secret. In those medical camps, crying wasn't rare. But mine was different. Mine came quietly in the middle of the night, muffled into the thin pillow we used for fevered patients. I started counting days, adding up silences, hiding my fear inside my chores. Bernice looked at me like someone who already knew. She never asked. One morning she simply handed me a wider cloth band. "For your back," she said. But I understood. It was to hide the curve growing in my belly. And it grew like a forbidden whisper. Quiet, persistent, unwanted by everyone. Except me. My body carried not just a child, but a kind of guilt, too. Back then, a black nurse getting pregnant on duty wasn't just a problem. It was a threat. It broke protocol, broke the silence, broke what they saw as ownership. They said our hands were for healing, not for wanting, not for loving, and certainly not for creating. I tried to keep my routine. I bent down and stood up like always. I said, "Yes, sir," and "Already done, doctor," with the same trained tone. But inside, every move rattled me. What if they noticed? What if someone touched my stomach in a rush and felt the warmth of life pulsing beneath their fingers? I started avoiding close contact. Changing sheets for the heavier soldiers became risky. Draining abscesses by the tent's edge made me dizzy. One morning I had to step away in the middle of stitching someone up because the smell of cauterized flesh turned my stomach. I faked a fever. I faked cramps. I faked everything. And in that season of faking, I felt something real inside me for the first time. That camp was a place where secrets went to die. But this one, I chose to protect. I wrote my first letter during the 3rd week of nausea. Addressed to no one with shaky handwriting and no date. It simply said, "You will not be named Silence." I signed it MG. I don't know why. Maybe it was my way of naming something that had no form yet, but already had presence. I tucked the letter into my pillow, and I kept working. Every time I touched a patient's wound, I hoped that touch reached the small life growing inside me, too. That it would survive the field, the pressure, the heat, the hunger. Because yes, I started hiding food. Apple slices, crumbs of bread. Extra sips of milk skimmed from the supplies without anyone noticing. My body demanded more. And I obeyed. Bernice noticed. She began covering my heavier shifts. Said it was a schedule swap. I pretended to believe her, and she pretended I didn't owe her thanks. It was around that time I first heard someone say my name with disgust. one of the nurses from the main ward. He said, "Green's been walking funny, like she's hiding something." Then laughed. Loud. Others laughed too. But what cut me wasn't the laughter. It was that they were right. I was walking different. Because joy hurts at first. One afternoon, while I was changing the dressings on a badly burned soldier, he stared at me too long and said, "You look like you're glowing, you know?" I froze. What did he see? Was my body already saying aloud what I couldn't yet put into words? I gave him a polite smile, empty, guarded, then walked away, shaking. That night I wrote another letter, this one with more words. It said, "Today I realized others can see you, but you're still just mine, and you'll be mine until my last breath." I tucked it in beside the first. I started collecting names, too. Surnames, slang the soldiers used, numbers, anything that might help me find him one day, if I ever needed to. Because by then I already knew. I wouldn't get to keep my child. I wouldn't have a choice. Not there. Not in that time. But I had to leave something in the world that might help him find me again. So I began sewing a blanket from scraps of cloth from Ward 2. Bits of old sheets, tossed out bandages, a loose button from Bernice's blouse, and right in the center, Charles's handkerchief, now fraying at the corners. Every stitch was a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. And even with all that care, the fear only grew. Because the body speaks, and the camp listens, and they had already started whispering. It was strange how my body seemed to be living in two separate worlds. On the outside, I was still prepping compresses, giving injections, clearing trays full of soiled gauze, washing my face in a hurry between screams. But inside, I was something else. Another rhythm, another frequency, one extra heartbeat, one less breath, a fear growing like roots in dry soil. The nausea, once spaced out, came in waves now. The smell of ether could knock me flat. The potato soup from the mess made my stomach churn. Even the sweat of the soldiers made me gag. And then there was the light bleeding, on and off, that left me breathless. I did what I could to hide it, stuffing folded cloth between my legs, sewn by Bernice in silence. But my face couldn't hide everything. The pale mornings, the nightly exhaustion, the hollow eyes of someone dreaming of what she knows she can't have. The first time I fainted was during a simple dressing change. I was standing by a boy with a leg wound. I bent down to grab a bandage, and suddenly everything spun. The canvas roof folded in like a hungry mouth. Then, blackness. I woke up on one of the iron cots, my face being fanned by a white nurse from the main ward. She looked at me like I was a broken tool. "You need to step away," she said, voice stiff. I tried to sit up, but she held me by the shoulder. "The head medic will be informed. Your condition may compromise team function." "Compromise," she said, like I was some kind of disease. Bernice showed up minutes later. Her eyes burned, but her mouth was tight shut. She draped a sheet over me and whispered, "Don't say anything. Not yes. Not no. Just breathe." I was ordered to rest for 2 days. 2 eternities. Alone in the supply tent. No visits. No words. Meals came cold, pushed in by hands that didn't meet my eyes. And while the world outside kept bleeding, inside me, silence started to speak. I used that time to write 2 more letters. The first one, short. "If they ever take me, I want someone to know you existed, even if it's just between the lines." The second one was longer. I tried to put into words what it felt like to carry a child in a place no child should ever be conceived. I wrote about the soft flutters, the exhaustion that hit out of nowhere, the joy that wore the mask of fear, and the fear that sometimes showed up dressed as longing. At the end of that letter, I traced the outline of my hand. I don't know why. I just felt that maybe, one day, someone could press their hand over that shape and feel a piece of me. On the third night, I was called to the commander's quarters. She was tall, hair pulled back into a bun so tight it looked painful. Her eyes were cold, her lips thin like thread. On her desk, no flowers, no photos, no clutter. Just a stamp, a pen, and a silver clock ticking way too loud. Miss Green has been diagnosed with exhaustion. She is officially relieved from duty until further notice, she said without looking up. I opened my mouth to protest, but before a word could come, she added, "Until further instruction, you are not to walk through common areas without authorization, for your own safety and the integrity of our internal operations." That was it. A polite way of saying, "You've been silenced." Back in my tent, I found Bernice waiting. She didn't speak, just handed me a bar of soap wrapped in floral cloth, the same soap we used to scrub dried blood from sheets. But in that moment, it felt like a gift, like she was saying, "Wash what you can, what stays. Leave it in your soul." In the weeks that followed, I was assigned minor tasks, folding blankets, counting instruments, cataloging syringes. It felt like I'd stopped being a nurse and become a walking reminder of something no one dared name. With every motion, I realized my body was saying more than I wanted. My belly wasn't flat anymore. My breasts ached. Sleep hit me like a rock dropped in a shallow pond. Still, I kept going, because there was no other choice. Around that time, I started hearing whispers, voices behind the canvas, phrases like, "They say she slept with an officer, brought shame to the tent. She'll stain all our reputations." Not all of them spoke, but most of them kept their distance. Only Bernice stayed close. She'd sneak apples up her sleeve, drop calming herbs into my cup. One night, she sewed a tiny hidden pocket into the lining of my uniform. "For your letters," she said. "Or a dream." That's when the back pain started getting worse, and the bleeding. Not heavy, but enough to steal my sleep. Every stain felt like a threat, a signal that I could lose what I hadn't even held in my arms yet. On one particularly hot night, I sat outside the tent, belly wrapped in cloth, feet soaking in a basin of water. I stared up at the sky and wondered if Charles was still breathing, if he thought of me, if he suspected, if he had told anyone, and what he'd say if he saw all this. The next morning, I woke to news that a medical inspection was scheduled for all the nurses in Ward 2. I knew what that meant. They wanted proof. They wanted to find what they already knew. And worse, they wanted to do it with a smile. The medical inspection was scheduled for a Wednesday. It rained the way it rarely does in Alabama. Not a storm, just one of those steady, relentless rains that feel like they're washing time itself. The canvas roof of our tent dripped slowly, like each drop was whispering, "It's coming." I woke up early that day, even before the dawn bells, put on my clean uniform, tied the cloth band tighter than usual, pinned my hair close to my scalp, and prayed. It wasn't a pretty prayer, or a calm one. It was a choked, clenched jaw kind of prayer. A tired soul kind of prayer. Bernice came before they started calling our names. She brought half a slice of bread, handed it to me with eyes damp but steady. "You're gonna need to swallow this, even if it won't go down." I didn't ask if she knew. I already knew that she knew. Since the first wave of nausea, since the extra folds in the bedsheet, since the silence we shared that said more than any confession ever could. They called us one by one. Green, Ethel J. came after 4 others. The health officer was the same tight-bunned woman. She didn't meet my eyes, but her fingers were in a rush. I was told to remove my uniform. I trembled. "Uniform, Miss Green, now!" It wasn't a request. It was a sentence. I stood there, chest covered by a thin undershirt, cloth band cinched tight beneath my belly. Her eyes skimmed over me like scalpels. They stopped on my stomach. There were no questions, just a slight raise of the eyebrows. Stand straight, turn, deep breath. I touched Charles's handkerchief, hidden in my sleeve. That gesture gave me strength. It reminded me that even if they took everything, something inside me still held on. "All right, you may dress," she said, tone flat as glass. That night I was summoned to the captain's office. I asked Bernice to come with me, but she shook her head. Her eyes said, "This time, it's just you." I walked to the quarters with cold hands and feet that barely touched the muddy ground. The sky still wept. The canvas roof above the office ticked with rain like a countdown to an execution. Because that's what it was. An execution of reputation. A symbolic erasure. Inside were 3 white men, 2 assistant captains and 1 administrative sergeant. No doctors, no women. They asked me to sit. "Nurse Green," the oldest began, his voice too calm for what was coming. "We've received a medical report suggesting that your continued presence in the camp may compromise team safety and sanitary procedures." Sanitary. That was the word they used. "Considering your current physical condition and its potential impact on operations, we've decided to terminate your nursing duties in the field, effective immediately." I said nothing. "You'll be transferred to a temporary rest facility until another placement is determined." Still silent. Then the youngest of the 3, the one holding a brown folder full of stapled papers, said the one sentence I've never forgotten. "We thank you for your service, Miss Green, and we hope that in the future you find peace somewhere else." And he smiled. SMILED. Not a smile of sympathy. Not even pity. It was a bureaucratic smile, the kind that files away people like documents. A smile with no nerve, no skin, no blood. The smile of protocol. The smile that says, nothing personal. But it was. It was personal because it was my body, my belly, my story. I signed the papers, hands shaking, eyes dry, and I walked out like someone carrying an invisible coffin. Outside the tent, I saw Bernice. She didn't hug me, just placed her hand on my shoulder. It was the only safe touch we had left. "Did they smile?" she asked, without looking at me. I nodded. It's always like that. First they call you a hero. Then they smile while taking everything from you. The next morning, I was removed from Ward 2. They said it was precautionary, that I'd be better off resting in isolation. But everyone knew what it meant. I was being erased, bit by bit, in blue ink, like a typo on a military report. The new tent was smaller, away from the medical unit. No other nurses, just me, an iron cot with a thin mattress, and a window covered in mosquito netting. They brought cold meals, 1 doctor a day, and silence, complete silence. I started writing more letters to the baby, to Charles, to myself. I scribbled names on scraps of cloth, toilet paper, on the wall made of clay. One letter said, "Today they took my uniform, but they couldn't take the part of me that knows how to care." Another, "If you ever read this, I want you to know I didn't leave by choice." I was dismissed with a smile in the eyes of those who never really saw me. I didn't cry for many days, until one night I woke with a sharp pain low in my belly. It was too early. My belly was still small, but the pain wasn't. It was the pain of blood, of fear, of loss arriving before the beginning. I curled up on the bed, pressed the wooden cross to my chest, tried to pray, but my voice came out silent, as if even God had been placed on indefinite leave. And in that silence, I understood. They hadn't just taken my role, my name, my work. They had taken away my right to be a mother with dignity, and they did it all. Smiling, the body knows. Long before the mind accepts, the body starts speaking. And mine was whispering screams. Every jab in my belly was a warning I pretended not to hear. Every short contraction, a sign that something was coming or leaving. And when I woke up in the middle of a hot, mosquito-choked night, with my clothes soaked in dark blood, I knew the waiting time was over. There was no one around. No nurse. No doctor. The small tent where they'd isolated me was more of a storage space than a room. I was lying on a metal cot, on a sheet so thin it felt like a dish towel. The lantern hanging outside swayed in the wind, casting trembling shadows on the canvas walls, like even the night itself was shaking with me. I tried to sit up, but the weight of my belly and the pain pulled me back down. My head spun. My heart pounded too fast. And then came the sharpest sound of the night, a gush of warm water rushing down my legs. My water had broken. There, alone, in the dark, no hands to hold mine, no voices to soothe me, no promises, no future. This wasn't how I imagined it. I had dreamed of Charles's handkerchief as a baby blanket, of Bernice by my side, of a tiny baby with restless eyes, gripping my fingers tight. But what I got was a dirt floor, muffled pain, and silence. I screamed, softly at first, then louder, then not at all. The pain took over like the camp itself was ripping through me. I curled up, rolled to my side, bit down on my sleeve so no one would hear. I was terrified that if they found out they'd rip the child from me like crossing out a mistake on paper. It lasted for hours, or maybe minutes. I don't know. Time lost all meaning in that space, until I felt it. A weight slipping out, a burn, and then emptiness. The child was born between my legs, wrapped in a soiled sheet, the cord still tying her to my body. She was small, so small that for a moment I thought she wasn't fully formed. I didn't cry, and neither did she. I held her with trembling hands. Her body was warm, but too limp. There was no strength in her cry, no color in her eyelids, just a faint twitch in her lips, like she was trying to say a name. That didn't exist. I whispered, "You're here. Can you see me?" She didn't answer, but she opened her eyes. For a second, 2 dark dots. The lantern's light flickered in their reflection. And then it went out. She stopped breathing not long after. There were no doctors, no scalpels, no record. Just the sound of something breaking inside me, like a bone that will never sit right again. I stayed there, holding her body, far too long. I stroked her head, kissed her forehead, wrapped her in the cleanest cloth I could find. And I called her Grace, because that's what she was, even without knowing it. Grace. A beam of light cutting through the darkest field of my life. Then I fell asleep. When I woke up, she was gone. The tent door was cracked open. The basin I'd used to wash the blood was gone. The blood-stained sheet, gone too. And beside the cot, a pinned note. Measures have been taken. Remain at rest. Nothing more. No date, no signature, no explanation. They took her from me, like erasing a stain. No question, no goodbye. I thought about screaming, running, tearing everything apart, but I couldn't. In that instant, I became something else, a shadow of who I'd been, a woman who had created life and for that very reason was labeled impure, unruly, unwanted. I didn't speak for days. Bernice managed to sneak in and sit by my side. She held my hand for a few quiet minutes, then handed me a small notebook, hand-stitched. The first pages held her words. They don't know what they took from you. But you know what you gave, and that no one can erase. I hugged that notebook like it was my daughter's body. I wrote the name, Grace, on every page. Drew her face the way I remembered it, round, silent, vast, despite how tiny she'd been. And I hid the notebook inside the mattress, beneath the foam. The following week, I was officially removed from the camp. No ceremony, no goodbye. Just an old truck, a driver with a blank expression, and an envelope with instructions for a rest center. I climbed into the truck like I was burying myself. But inside my clothes, sewn into the hem of my gown, I carried a piece of Charles's handkerchief and a lock of Grace's hair, snipped with my fingernails, still stiff from the birth. It was all I had left. And yet, it felt like more than they ever meant for me to carry. Because they didn't want me leaving with memories. They wanted me leaving empty. But I didn't. I left a mother. I left in pieces, but whole on the inside. And to this day, I wonder, if she had lived, would the world have truly let her live? The truck dropped me off at the Pineville train station, a small town where every house seems to peek through lace curtains into the lives of its neighbors. It was late afternoon. The sun was dipping behind the cypress trees, and the dirt road kicked up an orange dust that clung to my clothes, like a memory of everywhere I'd been. Folks around there didn't ask where you came from, only how long you planned to stay. And me? I didn't have an answer. My mother was waiting on the porch, sitting in her rocking chair, same cotton headscarf tied tight, hands resting on her lap. She didn't ask anything. Not, how was it? Not, why are you back so soon? She just looked at me with a gaze so old it felt like it had already seen everything. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, "The back room's still yours." I stepped into that house like someone walking on ground both sacred and cursed. Every piece of furniture was exactly the same. The floral curtains, the crocheted bedspread, the smell of soap and stale coffee still hanging in the air. But me, I wasn't the same. I lay on the bed where I once dreamed of futures that never came and cried. Not from despair, but from sheer exhaustion. I cried like someone emptying a river that had been dammed up for years. And for the first time, my mother held me without asking a thing. Because in that embrace, everything was already understood. The days moved on. Neighbors talked about the war like it had passed over the town without touching it. A son who died at the front, another who came back missing a leg. But no one ever mentioned nurses. Nurses weren't combatants. Nurses were support. And when support breaks, it gets thrown out. I started going out bit by bit. First to buy bread, then to help at the market, until one neighbor asked if I could look after her sick father, said, "You used to work in a hospital, right?" I nodded, and just like that, I was caring again, for small wounds, for old men with coughs, for feverish children. Every touch was my way of reminding myself that my hands were still good for something. I started working as a midwife, too. My mother was known for it, and I had learned just by watching. But it was different for me. Every time I heard a baby's first cry, my chest caved in. Because the cry I wanted most to hear never came. Grace still lived inside me. She came in dreams, eyes full of light, a body light as air. Sometimes a child, sometimes already grown. Sometimes calling me, other times just watching, like someone forgiving before ever being hurt. I began collecting things. A little shoe I found at the market, a blue hair ribbon, a cloth diaper left behind after a birth. And I wrote compulsively, letters, notes, journals. Many started with, "Today I saw something that would have made you smile." I kept it all in a wooden box I inherited from my grandmother. On the lid I glued a scrap from Charles's handkerchief. Inside, were the pieces of the life I didn't get to live. The unfinished blanket, the letters Grace would never read, a loose button from my wartime uniform. Little by little, I became known as the Care Lady. Everyone in town knew they could call me. I'd show up, with lemon balm tea, with warm towels, with the kind of silence that heals. I never charged much. Sometimes just a slice of pie, a basket of oranges, a gallon of milk. I just wanted to keep caring, because caring was the only thing that kept me from dying inside. I never told anyone what happened at the camp. People didn't ask, and when they did, I deflected. I did what I could. It was rough. Not everything was like they wrote in the papers. And so I stayed. Got older, calmer, but not lighter. The marks of that nameless birth stayed with me. In my body, in the way my back still ached when it rained, and in my eyes, always lingering 2 seconds too long, like they were searching for someone in the shadows of everyday life. Sometimes I wonder, if Grace had lived, what would she have been like? Tall, like Charles, full of laughter, like my mother? Would she have gone to school, fallen in love, called me Mama in public, with a mouthful of affection and no shame? Those questions are like wind rustling through leaves. You hear them, but never really see them. I did get marriage proposals, yes. 2 good men. I even dreamed about one for a while. But I couldn't say yes. How could I accept another's arms when I still carried the weight of a body that never grew? The town changed. Supermarkets came. New cars. New families. But I stayed. In my floral blouses, my wooden necklace, with a quiet faith. One day, while helping a very young girl give birth, she looked at me and asked, "How do you know how to do all this with so much calm?" I answered without thinking, "Because I lost the thing I loved most. And once you lose like that, you learn not to panic." She cried, and so did I. That day I wrote a different kind of letter. Today I helped bring a child into the world, and I didn't feel envy, only hope. I tucked it in with the others. My box was full now, but I couldn't stop. Every word was a brick in the bridge that kept me steady between what I lost and what I could still build. Because deep down, I knew. There's no real return for someone ripped from their own story. But sometimes, just by walking forward, that's a way of coming back. Even if it's not to the same place. Even if you return, without really returning. In the 1970s, when things slowly started to shift down south, a young woman from church came to me. She wanted to start a small support group for veterans' families. Said she needed someone with hospital experience and someone who knew how to listen. 2 things I had in abundance. I said yes right away. Not because I was looking for a fresh start, but because I'd never really stopped searching. I had only changed the form. I swapped stretchers for paperwork, scalpels for clipboards, bandages for words of comfort. I started organizing files, helping widows, writing letters to forgotten corners of government offices. Everything was done by hand. Nothing digital, nothing fast, all painfully human, sometimes heartbreaking, sometimes beautiful. The office was small, with wooden walls and a bookshelf where names piled up like seeds that never got to sprout. That's where mothers came looking. For news. Women with swollen eyes, sons without death certificates, fathers who still woke up in the middle of the night calling out for boys who never came home. And somewhere between one file and the next, it began. At first it was subtle. A Collins, then an S. Collins, then another, and another. The first time I saw that name, the paper almost slipped from my hands. It was a secondary registration file. No photo, not much detail. But it had the same last name. and a birth date that matched the month Grace should have been born. My stomach dropped. Was it him? Someone connected to her? Was it her, mislabeled by a clerk's error? My heart said yes. My reason said no. But even so, I wrote it down. I started doing that regularly. Every time a similar name popped up, a familiar detail, a repeating sound, I noted it. I kept a separate folder just for me, hidden behind the filing cabinets. A secret binder full of names, dates, impressions, possibilities. I'd jot things down beside each file. Possible link, date matches, recurring name, follow-up. The other volunteers called me thorough, but they didn't know that, in truth, I was stitching together a map of hope, a puzzle I might never solve. But that gave me a reason to wake up. I began to find patterns. Low-ranking soldiers with similar last names. Women who gave birth in shelters in the 50s, with compound names close to the ones I had imagined for Grace in my letters. A Gracelyn C. A Ella Grace Monroe. A Samantha J. Collins, with initials far too familiar. Every new file was another heartbeat, every coincidence a tear swallowed. And there were the encounters, too. People who walked into the office and for a second froze me in place. A woman with wavy hair and slanted eyes who spoke with a sweetness that felt too close. A man with light brown skin, Charles's forehead, and my mother's smile. Maybe it was just my imagination. But how could I say that out loud? A mother's heart recognizes even what it's never held. So I started writing again. This time, records. Short notes with unasked questions. Do you also miss what you don't remember? If I knock on your door one day, will you know it's me? Is the ache I carry etched with your name? I stored them all in my old wooden box. By then it had a name. Grace Box. I placed a tiny label on the inside of the lid, where no one could see it but me. And every night before bed, I'd pull a random file, read it softly, jot down a feeling. It became my faith ritual, my way of telling the world I still believed. Because some grief doesn't die, it becomes a compass, and mine always pointed to her. One day, a young volunteer saw me leafing through my hidden folder. "Mrs. Ethel, are you looking for someone?" I paused, then smiled, slow. Not someone. Something. A part of me that stayed somewhere out there in the world, and might still be breathing. She didn't understand, but she respected it, and that was enough. Over time, that folder became a collection. I had to hide it at home. I kept it under the bed, next to the Grace box. Sometimes I mixed letters with the files, made collages, built imaginary family trees, maps, possibilities. It was my way of keeping my daughter alive, of not letting her dissolve into the silence where they tried to bury her. Even now, when I see a Collins signing anything, a receipt, a letter, a newspaper article, my heart skips. Even now, even tired, even with aching knees and fading eyes, because hope doesn't age, and her name still lives in the margins of all the papers the world forgot. On my street, there lived a man named Henry Turner, one of those quiet veterans, the kind who talked little and smoked a lot, always staring at something no one else could see. We were never close. We'd nod at each other now and then, and sometimes in the summer, we'd share the shade of the same oak tree without saying a word. He lived alone, no children, no visiting nephews. Just a community nurse who came by on Wednesdays to check his blood pressure, his pills, and his loneliness. One cold November morning, the news came from the neighbor on the corner. Henry passed. No shock, no fuss. Just that quiet kind of sigh that comes when something long expected finally arrives. I went to the funeral out of respect. It was held in the small hall of the local Baptist church. The windows were foggy. and the flowers, though fresh, looked tired of decorating absences. 6 people showed up, all with lowered eyes and careful steps. The nurse's daughter, a young woman named Natalie, recognized me and walked over. "Would you mind helping sort through his things? He didn't leave anyone behind. But there are papers, boxes, old stuff. I figured someone like you might know what to do." I nodded. That sort of thing wasn't unusual for me. In a small town, you become the keeper of what time forgets. The next morning I went to his house. It was modest, smelled like old wood and cold grease. The radio was still on in the kitchen, tuned to a blues station that only played slow laments. The air felt heavy with Henry, like he was still there, waving from the corner. I started with the cardboard boxes in his bedroom. Letters, newspapers, medals, a folded flag, a faded photo of soldiers in the sun. And at the bottom of one box, wrapped in yellowed brown paper, a handkerchief. My fingers froze. I unwrapped it carefully. It was white, with blue stripes, and embroidered in the corner. C.E.C. My world stopped. It was Charles's handkerchief, the same one he had left tucked in the pocket of my uniform, the one I kept, lost, searched for, dreamed of, stitched into a quilt. There it was, just the same, a little more faded, folded in the same old lines, but whole. I sat on the floor. My legs gave out. My vision went dark, and a lump rose in my throat, a knot that had been waiting for this moment for decades. How had it gotten there? Did Charles and Henry serve together? Did Charles know? Did he leave it there to be found? I pressed the handkerchief to my chest and closed my eyes. Suddenly, I was back in that sweltering tent. Charles looking into my eyes, his raspy voice saying, "You carry light." I saw myself walking through the mud, belly swollen. Saw myself burying Grace in silence. And then saw myself, there again, in the room of an old neighbor, holding the past in my hands. Something inside me began to stir, a kind of faith I hadn't felt in years. I dug deeper into the box, found an envelope addressed to C.E. Collins, postmarked 1945, unopened. Next to it, a folded photograph, 2 men sitting on the edge of a military truck. One was Henry, the other was Charles, thinner, but unmistakable. Same jawline, same way of looking at the ground, like answers might grow from the dirt. On the back of the photo, in steady handwriting, "To my battle, brother. If I fall, look out for me." My heart jumped. Look out for me. Did Charles ask Henry to find Grace? Did he know? Had my daughter been closer all this time than I'd ever imagined? What if Henry knew everything? I closed my eyes, let the silence wrap around me like a heavy quilt, and for the first time in many, many years, I didn't cry from loss, but from gratitude, because that handkerchief was more than fabric. It was proof that love doesn't vanish. It changes shape, turns into paper, into pictures, into wind, into a handkerchief tucked deep in a forgotten box. I went home with it in my pocket and my heart lighter. That night I opened the Grace box, placed the handkerchief inside, alongside the letters, the scribbles, the impossible maps, and I wrote a new letter. "Charles, I found you at the end of the street, and even if it came late, it was in time." I locked the box with the same key as always, and I smiled, because now, it wasn't just pain living in there. It was the certainty that something survived, something of mine, something of his, something of ours, something of hers. The box has been there, at the back of the closet for almost 50 years. It's aged with me. The wood has darkened, the corners cracked, the handwritten label barely readable. But I know what it says. I know it by heart. Not because I read it every day, but because it's etched into me like it's part of my own name. Grace Box. Sometimes I spend hours just staring at it, from afar, like it's an altar you can only approach with a quiet heart. Sometimes I lift the lid just enough to glance at the papers, my eyes already welling up. Other times I can't even touch it, because some days, laying a hand on that box hurts more than the memory itself. It holds everything. Everything that was left. Everything that remained. Everything that maybe never even truly existed. At least not in the world's eyes. Inside are my letters. The drawings I made with trembling hands. Charles's handkerchief. The one with the initials that now feel tattooed on my soul. The records I secretly kept. A lock of hair wrapped in cloth. A quilt I never finished. A loose button from I don't even know what garment anymore. And one question. Silent. Immense. Alive. Is she alive? Did she survive that rushed delivery? The absence of care? The systematic erasure of her existence? Was she given to someone else? Raised by strangers? Did she ever think of me? Did she miss me the way I miss her? Those are the questions I still don't know if I want or can answer. Because opening that box feels like opening a door that might lead to yet another dark room. And not opening it means never leaving the hallway. My feet aren't as steady as they used to be. I walk slowly. I breathe with more effort. But what weighs most isn't the years. It's the things unsaid, unfound, unknown. Sometimes when dusk falls and the sound of crickets takes over the yard, I sit in the rocking chair with the box on my lap. I just rock, not opening it, just feeling its weight and remembering the heat of that tent, the warm blood down my legs, the first breath that almost became a cry, my daughter's silent gaze, that brief moment when she was in my arms, and then wasn't. I've held on to that memory like a sacred relic. But now, with life more behind me than ahead, I wonder, does she exist if no one remembers? Or is her existence made only of me? Some days I think of throwing it all away, burning it, burying it, ending this cycle with my own hands. But whenever I get close, something stops me. Maybe it's the fear of letting go of the only certainty I still have, that even without a body, without a certificate, without a photograph, she was mine. She is mine. Other times I think about giving it all to someone, letting someone else read the letters, see the names, connect the dots I couldn't. But what if she's never found? What if none of it makes sense? What if all that's left is the shame of a secret that never turned into a story? And then there's the other fear. What if they do find her? What if one day there's a knock at my door and someone says, "We found her"? And what if it's too late to touch, to speak, to feel? I keep one last unsent letter tucked into the lid of the box. I wrote it on a stormy day, when the porch roof dripped steady like a heartbeat saying goodbye. It says, "My daughter, if you're reading this, then some piece of me reached you. Maybe not my hug, or my voice, but my truth. And if you can still forgive me, I will be at peace." I signed it with the name I never got to say in public. Mama. That's the letter that hurts the most, because it carries everything, the absence, the longing, the love, the fear. I thought of including it in my will. Thought about asking to be buried with it, but I don't know. The truth is, I still don't know if I should open that box all at once, or if I want anyone else to open it after me. Because there are pains that, if opened by the wrong hands, bleed forever. And there are memories that only make sense when told with the right silences. So for now, the box stays closed. Not out of fear, but out of reverence. Because inside it lives an entire world no one ever saw. A world made of love, of loss, and the oldest feeling there is. Hope. And even today when I hear footsteps on the street and someone shouts a random name, I still turn my head. Because if one day I hear Grace, I want to be alive to answer. Some boxes we carry our whole lives, not in our hands, but in our hearts. They don't make noise. They don't take up space where others can see. But they weigh on us, as if inside them lives everything we were never allowed to say out loud. My box is small, old wood, hinges that creak now and then. But inside, it holds more than objects. It holds time. It holds absences. It holds the one thing no one ever managed to take from me. The memory that Grace existed, even if the world refuses to recognize her. For years I thought this war story was mine alone. A secret meant to stay locked away with the letters, the scraps, Charles's handkerchief. But over time, I've come to understand that some stories don't just belong to the ones who lived them. They belong to the ones who listen, too. To the ones who hold a piece of someone else's pain, even in silence. If you made it this far, you've opened a part of that box with me. And for that, I thank you. Because to be heard, after so long holding my breath, feels almost like breathing again. There are stories we tell just to survive, and others we can only whisper, because they hurt too much. Mine was a little of both. Today, sitting on this porch with the sound of crickets, the wood creaking beneath my feet, and the quiet faith that still holds on. I understand now that not every secret needs to be revealed to be real. Sometimes, it only needs to be felt. And if you, at any point in your life, have carried a pain no one saw, know that I see you. If you had to hide something to protect yourself, know that I understand. If you've loved in silence, if you lost without losing, if you cried alone while the world kept smiling, then maybe you and I are more alike than you think, and that makes us less alone. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes your listening ear might be the box another woman has been waiting to open. And if you'd like, stay a while. Subscribe to the channel, because there are more stories like this. Stories of nurses, of war, of secrets that still deserve a place to rest. Thank you for walking beside me. And until, maybe, the next silence we share.